They have handled this, very professionally. They've had protesters in their face. They've been shoved from behind. They've had water bottles thrown at them, perhaps other objects as well. We saw someone shoving the blunt end of a flag at them earlier, and they have this situation completely under control at this point. There was a lot of fear about things really spiraling here, and at least, for the moment, that is not the case. They've been in a very, very delicate operation, and there may still be more for them to do because of the protests that was taking place out on Jefferson and Hoover. We'll see if they're going to be summoned to respond to that as well, because they're illegally, to my knowledge anyway, illegally blocking the street out there. Even if they had a permit, we know that LAPD does not have a lot of patience for protesters blocking public thoroughfares like that. So it's like, why not give you the big shot here? And you can see LAPD's helicopter still monitoring things from the air. So, they have everything covered pretty well here. This is where they are processing folks, getting their information, and putting them in the back of vans where they will be headed downtown after they are processed.
All right, Desmond, we're going to let Desmond go and get some fuel up on some fuel and come right back to this protest. But as we continue this coverage of the protests at USC, might be important to note that earlier today, the LAPD put out a citywide tactical alert that was earlier this afternoon in anticipation of the protest today on campus at USC. So clearly, they knew that this was going to happen today. They were clearly ready for it. They sent out officers when they needed to. And as Desmond was alluding to, the incredible calm and just the measured ways that they are choosing to handle this. We've seen different situations in the past, as we know from the summer protests after the death of George Floyd during the height of COVID. We saw a very different situation. And as I referred to earlier, the LAPD's interim chief, Chief Dominic Choi, talking about the fact that officers' training is so important in cases like this, and that is one of the things that he wants to do during his tenure as interim chief, is make sure that the officers are trained specifically for tense situations like this one today.
Yeah, and we know students are protesting, and these scenes right here are playing out all across the country on college campuses. It seems like the centralized message here, students are demanding their schools cut investments supporting Israel. So a lot of students are standing up and they're protesting, and you're seeing demonstrations like this play out on college campuses all across the U.S. We want to go back down on the scene, on the ground where Luzdeya Caballero is, and she has been there for the last few hours. Luzdeya, I'm interested to know, you've been out there for a few hours. What are some of the protesters and the students, what are they telling you? I know earlier we talked about the valedictorian there, Asna Tabassum, and her commencement speech being axed. Are people talking about that on the ground there?
Initially when we got here, yes, many students and even community members still completely outraged that she was nixed of her opportunity that they say was a very well-deserved opportunity to give that speech. And I do want to remind everybody that she does have a minor in resistance to genocide. So a lot of students and community members that we spoke to said, she went to this university, she learned on campus with faculty here, and when she's applying what she's learned, she's then stripped of her right to give a speech, one that community members and protesters alike believe that she definitely earned in her own right. And now you hear less of that and more of, we are going to stay here and we are going to make our voices heard. And ultimately what we're seeing now with Los Angeles Police Department officers taking protesters one by one here in the middle is their message is now, we will stand for what we believe in, even if that means getting detained, even if that means getting arrested and potentially being taken away from this space. And as far as we see, it's a very peaceful process. Officers approach the protesters here in the middle, and in many cases, like we've seen the last couple of people that are coming out of this circle, they willingly unlink arms and allow officers to do their job and take them away. messages that we've been hearing throughout the day from those who are a part of this pro-Palestinian protest, and even those who are, allies. They've been saying that they just want peace in the Middle East. We spoke to a student who's part of Hillel here on campus, which is a Jewish group here on campus, and she says, hey, I don't know what that valedictorian would have said, but I do believe in free speech. I don't believe in hate speech, but she said, I do believe in free speech, and I think that that was potentially unfair. And what she told me is, it was a well-deserved, well-earned right that was stripped from her. So we're seeing a lot of people coming together here and really sympathizing with the cause and, making themselves allies to people here being able to be heard and exercise their right to freedom of speech. The USC Divest from Death Coalition, which is actually the group which organized this protest, released 6 demands of the university, and some of them included ending war, profiteering, and investment in genocide, which Chauncey talked about, and also protecting free speech on campus. And so this is something that we are seeing play out in real time, where some students and community members feel like potentially them being taken off of this property, taken off of this park, is actually an act that's violating their freedom of speech. We had the Department of Public Safety announce, hey, this is private property, and of course we've been reporting on this for probably over an hour now, when they gave them the 10-minute warning, hey, you got to leave this area, it is private property, and we are going to take action if you don't. And clearly they didn't, because they do and fundamentally believe that it is their right to be here and it is their right to be heard, and continue spreading that message. And ultimately the 2 themes, the 2 points that have been hammered time and time again today are those 2 points, which, they want USC to end war, profiteering, and investment in genocide, and also to protect student and community members' right to freedom of speech on campus. And you can see that center there. You have a couple of people sitting, a very few left standing and linked, and now the crowd is chanting, let them go. I'm going to stop talking so maybe you can pick up on this. But the reality is they are not going to be let go. And I think this is a bigger part of the LAPD's effort to clear this area, however long it takes. I mean, this protest started more than 9 hours ago, and it is still going strong at this time. It's peaceful, but the LAPD has to take these measures in order to clear this area out. And unfortunately for some, I believe that they feel like they should be here, but they are going to be removed. At this time, it seems like it's peaceful. It's cordial, and from my perspective, the officers that are removing these protesters are doing so in a manner that it comes from an approach of de-escalation at this time. So at this time, it's peaceful. I mean, there was some pushing and shoving and water bottles thrown at officers. At this time, there's none of that. I mean, people are just chanting and really wanting these students to be released, which they may very well be later on, but I don't foresee that happening until this is cleared out, and that might not happen for several more hours. Guys?
Delia, thank you so much. And just behind Delia's shot there is what you're looking at from the sky from above, is that circle that keeps getting smaller and smaller as police officers move in and make arrests one by one, detaining individuals who are involved in this protest after dispersal orders went out almost 2 hours ago now on the campus of USC. And that circle that we were looking at that got smaller and smaller, I was just noticing that it was before, I believe they were trying to make a peace sign to encourage peace in the Middle East. Obviously, that has been the theme of these protests. But as we take a live look, we're joined now by Juan Fernandez. Alongside Juan Fernandez, I'm Susie Sugg. Good evening to you. We continue to follow breaking news now in the second hour of our breaking news over at USC. Alumni Park taken over today by protesters, and the campus shut down even earlier today so that no more protesters could come onto campus. And so far, we've seen dozens of arrests made so far, Juan.
That's right, Susie. And you know, for most of the day that we've been out there, things have been rather peaceful. There was some tensions earlier in the evening when I believe officers wanted the protesters to remove some of the tents that they had set up there as they were setting up an encampment there on campus as a sign of protest. And I guess it was right around the 6 o'clock hour, right, when some bottles were thrown, a rock was thrown, and that's when you really saw things started to get heated up. But as you mentioned, that circle getting smaller and smaller, and people willingly being arrested to prove a point. They're very upset with the situation happening right now in Palestine. You see there one other protester putting his hands behind his back. And something very interesting, like the demands from these protesters, not a lot. But you keep reading and you keep seeing on social media what they want is for the school to cut ties with any companies, with any organizations that support Israel. And what's interesting, a university like USC, right, has so many important donors within the community who are Jewish, who have a very strong support of Israel. So it's a really delicate situation. It's a very delicate subject to deal with. And you can see what can happen here in just a short amount of time.
Yeah, so delicate on so many levels, Juan, as you were just talking about. You know, Alumni Park, where these protests are actually taking place tonight and have been taking place all day today, is actually the location where the graduation, the commencement ceremony takes place at USC. Right. So very symbolic in that way as well. As we know, as we were referring to earlier, there was a bit of some tension and controversy at USC earlier this week with the valedictorian not being able to speak no longer because of the possible just tensions of what's happening in the Middle East right now. And she had some social media comments that the university didn't like, and they said, you know what, we're not going to let anyone speak for that matter. So obviously a lot of tension already forming on campus, and now today, as Juan was mentioning, an encampment was set up this morning on campus at Alumni Park with people bringing in tents and signs and food to stay there at the park and hold these demonstrations. And that's when the LAPD, just shortly after noon today, they put out a tactical alert after there was a small skirmish there when one person was detained when the tents were being taken away because it is private property on USC, so they cannot have these tents there and these encampments. That was the first scuffle that we saw. There was another one, as Juan was referring to, around the 6 o'clock hour when a woman was detained for throwing what appeared to be some sort of water bottle or something with liquid in it at officers. And we don't know that they were necessarily actual protesters, perhaps people who were watching what was happening and supporting the effort. But what you're looking at on the left side of your screen now is on the ground there as we watch protests take to the streets surrounding Exposition Park.
That's right. Also on the ground, we have our Tom Waite, where he is watching that group of protesters get smaller as arrests continue tonight. Tom?
And Juan and Susie, it's very methodical. I mean, as we've been reporting, it's just one by one. The officers come up to the group, and it looks like they're almost helping them choose among themselves which one wants to go into custody next. It's that sort of peaceful and orderly, and we see officers coming back up to the group. There we see another woman getting up, and she's about to get zip-tied. She was sitting in the center of the circle, as you said. It's getting much smaller. There was a group surrounding the protesters. They were taken away first, most of them anyway, and then now they're working their way through the center of the circle. So, and then also what you have is a lot of onlookers here. They're chanting, "Shame on you" was sort of the last thing we've heard them chant. But for the most part, it's just kind of it's a group of people just kind of looking and watching. Hands off students is what they're chanting now. But besides chanting right now, that's pretty much all we've really seen in the last hour or so. As Juan was saying, you know, we did see the water bottles being thrown and some water at one point when they were forming a skirmish line around the park. But then they kind of collapsed the line right now, and that's kind of where we stand. You have a much smaller circle of officers. No one's really challenging them. From my vantage point, I haven't seen anybody try to push through the line. No one has made any attempt to run into the park from where we are right now. The big question I have, I guess, is what happens when they do have everyone in custody? Will they then probably push the line out so that the park stays clear? unclear at that point kind of what their strategy is, but right now it seems to be going as planned. Now we are seeing one person kind of do a gesture, an expletive gesture. I don't know who it was pointed at, directed at, if it was the officers. That's sort of unclear what that person was doing. But again, yeah, you're kind of watching one by one those officers being arresting these people. And the other thing I sort of notice is, besides the chanting, the officers seem sort of relaxed. It doesn't seem as tense. It was kind of tense earlier, but they don't seem to be, you know, you can sort of read their faces. I've been in enough of these situations where you can kind of get a sense of how officers are handling the situation. They seem very controlled. They seem very poised. It doesn't seem like there is a real threat to them at this moment. Of course, that can change. It's a volatile situation. It can be very chaotic at times, but besides the chanting that you can probably hear around me, that is the extent of it.
Tom, have you had a chance to talk to any of the students there? I mean, what's the plan going forward, as you were mentioning, once everyone's arrested, once they clear the area, once nightfall happens? I mean, is there a plan?
You know, I think right now there's no real organized protest. There's no protest organizer. There's a lot of people here that are in solidarity with the protesters, but they are not necessarily being led by one person. I've spoken to a few. No one's, you know, I think people are frustrated that USC didn't let this protest go on a little bit longer. They feel like the campus reacted so quickly and asked the LAPD to come in without letting people kind of carrying out this protest for longer. That was kind of the main thing I've been hearing from students that I've talked to. That they're sort of surprised that the LAPD was asked to come in and move people as quickly as they did. But yeah, there we go. The group getting smaller and smaller there, as one by one they are leading people away in zip ties. But that's really the only major complaint I've heard from the protesters. Is some are just are bewildered or just wondering why there wasn't a little bit longer of a time for people to make their voices heard in this particular protest. Obviously, the university, you know, they have their own situation they have to deal with. They have demands on this property. They have other students who need to use it. Graduation obviously coming up. There's a number of, there's any number of issues that would bring the university to send in and the LAPD to clear out the park. So I guess it'll be interesting to see, though, how the administration kind of deals with some of the student complaints about why, or if they're accused of kind of silencing free speech because they did have the LAPD come in to break this up as quickly as they did. But again, for the most part, obviously we had some issues, but for the most part, it has been very orderly. There's been moments of tensions, obviously, and chaos is a little bit of chaos as well. But as Desmond, I think Lucideli was saying too, it's been a pretty methodical and organized effort that hasn't really been deterred from the LAPD. They've kind of just done what they are trained to do. They've formed a line, and they are taking people away one by one without any incident at this point, especially with the arrests. There hasn't been an escalation in the crowd. There hasn't been people sort of charging through the line because they're angry about the arrests. Just chanting, just people kind of looking. And you can see kind of...
Oh, it looks like we lost Tom there for just a second.
I'm short, so I can't see too much. Go ahead.
No, Tom, we lost your audio for a second, but go ahead with what you were saying.
Oh, I was saying that, yeah, now that I'm standing, I'm kind of on my tiptoes trying to see the crowd here. It's not nearly as large as it was before, but there's definitely people still, there's tensions. I think you can see a young man there. He's upset by what he's seeing there, and obviously, people here are passionate in their beliefs and willing to go to jail for them, so you're going to have that. You're going to have people who are upset, and this is a tough thing for some to watch, especially there's a lot of young people here. And they're supporting their fellow students, some of whom may be Palestinian and obviously very upset about what they're seeing playing out in the Middle East and playing out in Gaza. There's also any number of Jewish students on campus that are also having their own safety concerns. obviously a protest over the war. That's a totally legitimate protest to have, but there's also been a number of anti-Semitic incidents. USC not getting a great grade from the ADL when they did grades here. So, you know, police are all aware of all these dynamics that are playing out. There's a lot happening here, but we haven't heard anything anti-Semitic since we've been here, or since I've been here. I have not heard anything like that. It's just been a protest about the situation in Gaza and people angry about what they've seen played out. But I have not seen anybody hurling insults or you know, racist or anti-Semitic slurs at anyone. So that is the good news there. People seem pretty focused on one concept, at least from the time that I've been here. I obviously can't speak for what's happened earlier today or before today. So, but in any case, it does seem to be in some ways winding down. As I look out of the crowd, it's just maybe a few dozen where I am, maybe you know, a few hundred in this circle around the park. But maybe people kind of going about their business now, and they've still got the chopper up going around and around, and that obviously is a tactic to get the crowd to disperse. They're now putting up a police line tape, crime tape. Uh-oh, someone just broke the crime tape. That's not going to go over well. This is
yeah, we're seeing that.
Yeah, we don't like, you know, obviously this is going to cause some tension, and this is something we don't want to see. And someone running away. Yeah, I don't. It's, you know, this is one of those things where you just have one little thing happen in the crowd. Somebody does something stupid, throws something, takes down crime tape or whatever they were doing, and you know, it just one little escalation can really change the whole dynamic. And you've got one person now sticking a middle finger in the face of an officer. It's so silly. I mean, come on. This officer is just doing his job and trying to secure the location as he was called to do.
Right.
You know.
It's a delicate balance, right? The protesters with law enforcement and university officials. There's on one side of the equation is the right to free speech, the right to demonstrate, the right to say that you're upset about a certain situation. And then, you know, the safety of the general public, the students that are out there, and the subject at hand, right? The Middle East has always been a hot subject, and here we are. It's students who want basically the university to pull away any investments from companies or organizations that support Israel, and it's not easy with the university, like USC, again, who I mentioned earlier, has many investors and many donors and many alumni, former students who are Jewish and are supporters of the university.
That's right.
Yeah.
And during the 6 o'clock hour, we showed you an intersection outside of campus that was at Jefferson and Hoover, where a large group of protesters gathered in the intersection there, stopping traffic there, making a lot of traffic turn around. But it looks like it could be this group that is now on the streets around Exposition Park, around the USC campus, taking their protest now to the streets. And I believe there was some traffic control that was ahead of them. So the LAPD really on top of it today with this one. They called out a tactical alert, a citywide tactical alert earlier this afternoon to make sure all the resources are available should anything happen, or just so that they can support this group as well. Again, First Amendment speech rights being protected. The LAPD wants them to do this. They want to allow the protesters to do this because it is in their right.
And safely.
But they want to make sure they do it safely. Exactly. And so as you can see, this protest marched down the streets now of Exposition Park. The police on campus still trying to make those last few arrests after the dispersal order went out just after 5 o'clock this evening.
And I think you're right about this group, Susie, that we're looking at from SkyCal on the right side of the screen there. I had seen a shot from SkyCal earlier of that intersection of Jefferson and Hoover, and it looked like the majority of that intersection had been cleared out, and hopefully traffic has been able to flow through there. But if you're near Exposition Park, folks, or know somebody who is, you know, it's going to be very busy. Traffic's going to be diverted around the university just to keep things clear, make sure law enforcement and emergency vehicles can get in and out if they have to. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And also, the same group that we're seeing marching around the campus may be, as you were saying, Susie, the same one who was blocking the intersection earlier. So same protest, two different locations, which of course limit how many officers can respond to each one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the campus of USC was closed off earlier today. The gates were actually shut because of the fact that campus police officers, they actually wanted to make sure that the protests were safe and not any other people, outside parties, were getting onto the campus because of the sheer crowds that were forming there and possible skirmishes that could take place. And so obviously this is the bigger group now that's outside of campus. These could possibly include students as well as people who are also just in protest, and it looks like they've been gathering since earlier this evening to make this happen. And you know, a lot of these protests we're seeing across college campuses this week, and many arrests have been made, namely at the University of Columbia, or Columbia University, I should say. And you know, just the same scenes playing out with encampments being taken apart because of the fact that a lot of private properties don't allow those kinds of things to take place on their campuses, as it could be a disruption for the events at school that actually take place with students. So looks like we're looking at a smaller protests on the streets of Exposition Park tonight. You can see the USC buildings there, and still a few crowds left at USC as well on campus.
Yeah, we see some of those signs there that said end the occupation in Gaza, stop the genocide. Someone who had been here on campus for most of the day is our Luz Delia Caballero. She was on campus at the very beginning part of this protest. She was reporting for KCAL News at 4, 5, and 6. Luz Delia, bring us up to date. What do you know?
Well, directly behind us, you see that there are maybe 2 people left sitting from my vantage point. A third has been removed. And we're talking dozens of people were inside this center circle in the middle of Alumni Park. You had a big group that was sitting down, like the 2 that you see now. Several other, and they were all linked in arms, and several others were standing. And so easily, I would say several dozens of protesters have been arrested and taken away at this time. The first arrest happened in the morning when Department of Public Safety officers here at USC actually started coming in and removing tents. And when you say that you saw a sign that said end the occupation in Gaza, this protest, according to organizers, was symbolic of that occupation, hence the encampment, hence putting the tents up and staying here with the intention of being here for the long haul and actually making their voices heard. We see that last person who is on the ground there holding the flag of Palestine, and the crowd is cheering. I do want to note that something that I noticed as these protesters were being detained, as they, voluntarily, they got up and, did what officers told them to do. Some had an ear-to-ear smile. It was almost like they were proud of what they're doing. They are strong in their convictions, and they're staying true to what they believe in. So as this last person comes up, it wouldn't be surprising if people start cheering. And if we hear the same chants that we've heard as people have been arrested, which is shame on you. But even then, I do want to say that it feels very peaceful. Officers from the Los Angeles Police Department, when they came in their formation and boots started moving toward Alumni Park, they were very much on the defensive with their body language, and obviously they were trying to secure the perimeter, as were protesters. Everybody seemed a little on edge, officers on the defensive, and protesters really not knowing where to go or what to do. And of course, you have certain actions that triggered pushing and shoving and throwing water bottles. At one point earlier this morning, a glass bottle was thrown just above us and landed right in front of us, shattering. So there have been incidents here and there, but I want to point out that as of now, even officers are very much relaxed, and it seems like protesters are as well. It almost seems like they're accepting that, the last of those that were in the inner circle, chanting and spreading that message of hopefully a peace in Gaza and peace in Israel, they're now out. And so now it seems like the protesters are now waiting to see what comes next. And I think that's the same for the Los Angeles Police Department officers. They're waiting for an order to see what they do next, how they are going to clear out this area. But everybody seems very calm, and you know, chants are still going on, but it's not as loud as it was earlier. I do want to also point out that, I mean, the big question here, and I think what initially triggered the first bout of tension between officers and protesters was the fact that some student leaders, and we were there when the Department of Public Safety came up and tried to use the megaphone on the patrol car to tell them to clear out. The big question here is, was that enough? And did they give the protesters enough warning? Because from our vantage point, they attempted to say something. We couldn't even hear what they were saying. And then an officer told a student leader, an organization leader next to her, hey, you know, we're going to go in and remove the tents. But that message was certainly not echoed, because it was seconds later that a line of officers came in and started removing those tents. So that was the first time we saw officers and protesters clash. And just a few minutes after the LAPD moved forward and it started really moving close to Alumni Park and close to neighboring buildings, that we saw water bottles being thrown and such. But overall, I do want to point out that, you know, the LAPD has approached this from what I believe a very sensitive standpoint, and have used judgment in the way they handle this. And ultimately, I mean, we see the results. Officers are very much relaxed, and protesters are standing and waiting. I think both parties are just waiting to see really what happens next. And if you look to the middle of Alumni Park, nobody is sitting, nobody is standing. Everybody has been detained, and from our count, it's well over 40 people that have been arrested and taken away. And of course, the two earlier, one in the morning who was arrested and then released, and then one just before officers surrounded Alumni Park and then started taking protesters one by one from this center circle. So at this point, it seems like officers are really just waiting for any sort of direction, any sort of order. So it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out as this protest continues. Again, at least 9 hours where people have been here standing, chanting, making their voices heard, and it could certainly go in to, you know, well over into 1 or 2 more hours. So we'll just wait and see what happens next, and keep you all posted on what we see down here on the ground.
Luz Delia, thank you so much. And on the right side of your screen, you're looking at what happened earlier, as Luz Delia was referring to. A man detained when his tent was being taken away by public safety officers on campus, who said that because of the private property, they're not allowed to have these tents and these encampments set up, which has been the scene at campuses across the country. And you also saw that man get into a patrol car, and protesters actually surrounded that car, banging on the door and demanding that he be released. And he was released a short time after that. I don't know if it's because of what the crowd said or for some other reasons, but apparently he was released. And then we didn't see anything in terms of skirmishes or you know, any conflict until there's that scene right there playing out on the right side of your screen.
With the vest on, right?
Exactly,
Yeah,
and that was the tent before that. But after that, around the 6 o'clock hour, when we were still covering the protests that continued on campus, there was a little bit of a skirmish with police officers when a woman threw some sort of object with liquid in it at officers, and that person was quickly detained. And shortly after that, Juan, is when we kept seeing people being detained one by one as they were being taken away from a circle very peacefully. One by one, and being detained and put into an LAPD van.
And we see these moments, right, whenever there's a large group of people protesting, and Luz Delia brought up a very interesting bit of information, which is how the LAPD handled these protesters, how a lot has changed since the George Floyd protests several years ago, the way officers handle things. If you were here in Los Angeles, it was also, we were dealing with the pandemic.
Yeah, during the height of COVID.
And the height of COVID and the George Floyd protests, it was tense every single time. And we know these officers have received training since then, and and these are the situations that they train for, and you can see how well organized the students are as well. You see the signs are well printed out signs, and so far we've had several issues with the water bottle being thrown, with the tents being removed, and a little bit of anger back and forth, as Tom was telling us. Some of the protesters were using obscene gestures towards the officers, but other than that, we haven't seen anybody being taken away by ambulance, anybody hurt, and it looks like from what we've seen in some of this past video, they're just moving these students off to an area basically just off from Alumni Park there, where they're being basically arrested, right?
Detained, yeah.
Detained, they're arrested, they fill out some paperwork, and I think you get released right away. It's like cite and release. They're not really taking you to jail, but there is a record that you have been arrested. So the question is, what's going to happen as these hours move forward? Will these protesters disperse, move on, come back tomorrow? That we still don't know.
On the left side of your screen is a protest happening right now on the streets of Exposition Park. And on the right side of your screen is earlier this evening at Exposition Park and Alumni Park, as Juan was referring to. Let's go to the ground once again to get a look at what's happening now. Our Tom Wake joins us now with this update. Tom?
And good evening to you, Susie and Juan. Yeah, right now things are pretty static. A lot of people still in the park. You can take a live look. People standing around. The police line is still here. Other than that, there are people chanting Free Palestine. Some of the onlookers that have stuck around, I'd say there's a few hundred people still here, maybe more than that. But it's definitely a smaller crowd than it was. Very peaceful, calm right now, besides some cheering. They've got the LAPD chopper still circling the park. I think that's obviously a deterrent. They're hoping that will eventually drive people to leave the park and go home. But as for right now, people are just kind of milling about, chanting, and I think they're kind of waiting to see what happens next as well. But as we've seen play out over the last hour or so, a lot of very orderly and methodical arrests, people going without any incident, being pulled out of that group that was in the center of the park, one by one, without any resistance really, and a peaceful end to that part of things at least. And now we just kind of are waiting to see what happens with the group here that's still in the crowd, still waiting here, and still kind of standing at the police line.
It looks like we lost Tom's shot there for just a second.
It's a volatile situation.
Go ahead, Tom.
You're back, Tom. We lost your audio for just a second.
Oh, all right. Well, hopefully my mic is big.
Okay, it cut out again.
I don't know. Let's see here. How about now? Can you hear me okay?
Go ahead, Tom.
All right, we'll try it again. The officers seem to be, they're standing guard, but there's not a tense situation as there was earlier. They're chanting "Shame on you," but other than that, really, it does seem the officers have kind of eased up in terms of their stance. They are obviously still in that police line. They're still making sure that no one crosses it. They want to make sure that no one re-enters the center of the park. But the park is still technically occupied by a group of people here. They have not left. So the question then becomes, how long do they allow these protesters to be here? As I was saying earlier, one of the students I was talking to, he was telling me he was sort of mystified and a little upset that USC did not allow the protests to go on for longer. They felt like that people's voices weren't necessarily heard for as long as they should have been, and that it could have been that the university acted too quickly. Now, of course, everyone's going to have a different opinion on that, whether they were too quick or if they acted in a way to prevent the...
Okay, now I think we did lose Tom's camera and audio. Tom, if you can hear us and you can start talking, we'll stop talking when you reconnect with us. But you can imagine a fluid situation, right? Tom's moving around the protesters, and we're all dealing with this technology.
That's right. But as we were talking about, and as Tom was referring to, they're on the ground still at Alumni Park tonight at USC. There are dozens of protesters still on campus. Let's go to our Luzdelia Caballero, who is there on the ground to give us this report.
Yeah, so I mean, as you mentioned, there are still plenty of protesters out here. We hear the drums going off. We see flags being waved and certainly some chants. What we also see is a lot of trash left behind. And I believe that that's mostly because protesters had to get up and leave when their tents were initially being stripped by officers and removed. And they had to kind of get up in a haste because they quickly realized, hey, if I don't get my tent, grab my belongings, they're going to be taken away. Then we saw them, marching with their tents literally in hand around Alumni Park. And earlier, LAPD tried putting up, that yellow crime scene tape around the trees, and they quickly realized, hey, that's a really bad idea. I mean, that tape was, torn apart by protesters that were right in front of those trees. And it seems like, officers are holding their line, again, still in a very much relaxed position. Things don't feel tense at all. And there are no clashes, no visible clashes that we can see at this point. And just detailing kind of what we've seen and lived through as we've been covering this since just after 10 o'clock this morning. When we got here, everything was very peaceful. People were setting up shop, putting up their tents, talking, sharing stories. Officers eventually moved in, and to many people's surprise, seemingly without warning, although, the Department of Public Safety did try to, on their, megaphone on their patrol car, to say something. The noise drowned all of that out. And so to many protesters, I feel like, even hearing their reactions, they almost felt blindsided, like they weren't given enough time or enough warning or even given any information at all as to what they needed to do and how they needed to do it and in what time frame they needed to do it in. And so, you see chaos starting to erupt. Very tense moments, obviously heightened emotions, and so one thing led to another. We see one of the protesters being arrested and taken into a patrol car. And I do want to kind of elaborate on that because you all touched on that you saw that the protester was taken into that patrol car and it was unclear as to why they were released. We also don't know why they were released, but I can tell you we were very close to that patrol car. We could probably almost touch it if we wanted to. And that patrol car was surrounded 360 degrees by hundreds of people, and I'm talking a line going all the way around that patrol car and layers of people blanketing the area. So even if that officer that was in the driver's seat wanted to move, they absolutely could not move because the crowd was actually moving toward the patrol car. And we saw at one point that they tried to, reverse the car. Bad idea. They ended up staying right where they were. So we assumed that they saw that, protesters were getting very emotional, very passionate, and were getting louder and louder. And they were making their voices heard and giving out a clear message that they wanted that protester out as soon as possible. And so then we start seeing some movement. We start seeing officers say, hey, everybody back up. We are going to release this individual. And they encouraged the crowd to go back to Alumni Park. And the protester who was in that car, who we got word from a close friend or acquaintance that was actually potentially an alumni here at USC, he actually encouraged everybody to go away from officers into Alumni Park. So again, we see an escalated situation, we see chaos breaking out, we see the crowd going toward officers, a lot of tension, and then that tension is diffused. And that was the second time we saw that. The first time was when officers stormed and started stripping these protesters of their tent. Of course, that second situation where we see that protester getting detained, but getting put into that patrol car, and then everybody moving here, then peace once again. And then we again start seeing tensions starting to rise, emotions starting to get heightened when the LAPD's presence is definitely perceived and seen and felt, and they start moving in. Then we see more of that clash, more of that tension, and we see officers and protesters alike on the defensive, and understandably so. Officers looking out for one another and ultimately themselves, and protesters trying to do the same. And I think both parties just really trying to understand what's going on, what's going to come next, and be safe about it. And, you know, we see certain actions that escalate, things like water bottles being thrown at them. We were hit by water bottles as well, and you know, water being thrown at officers and going absolutely everywhere. So tensions heightened again. I think that was the third time where I would say that tensions were high, and you know, there was a clash between protesters and police. But now a much different story after dozens of people were detained and removed. The protesters now are chanting, and you know, you hear drums and some music, but other than that, it's a very relaxed space. You know, I don't feel unsafe. I don't think many people here, based on body language and just their approach, you know, to the situation, and even in talking to officers, it doesn't seem like anybody really feels threatened right now. Everything's much more relaxed, and it seems like once again we have a peaceful environment here at USC at Alumni Park. Guys.
All right, Luz Delia, thank you so much. We want to remind our viewers streaming on CBS News Los Angeles right now, we're going to continue our coverage. But to our KCAL viewers, we want to remind you to join us for KCAL News at 8 in about 26 minutes. But again, we're going to continue our coverage on CBS News Los Angeles.
And good evening, everybody. Juan Fernandez here along with Chauncey Glover. Susie Sa tapping out for the moment now. We continue this breaking news story happening at USC. Dozens of students detained and arrested at a campus protest. Our Desmond Shaw is live above the campus right now with the very latest. Desmond, what do you see from your vantage point there?
Well, Juan, we just arrived back here over Alumni Park, and you can see here the center of the park is completely empty, save for quite a bit of trash that is left behind. But LAPD, it looks like they have detained all of the folks that were earlier here locked arm in arm in a circle, refusing to vacate the park. So now we have an empty park and LAPD surrounded by a lot of other people. These may be protesters, probably a mix of protesters from earlier who didn't want to get arrested and vacated the park, and then you just have some regular students at USC as well. So it's this area where we have seen tempers flare at times. Since we got back to the scene, I haven't seen too much in the way of that, but some of the folks here on the front lines just getting very, very close to LAPD, a lot of words being exchanged. We'll widen out and show you over here where they were processing all of the people that had been in the park earlier. They have a lot of them seated right here. We had a couple of those wagons out here, big vans, where they were taking, you know, a dozen or so people at a time downtown, and I think they're waiting for more vans to arrive. So they here are the folks. These are some of the last ones that were sitting in the middle of the park earlier. I wanted to note, I'm going to widen out and show you over here as I go back to the north, because we were warning everyone about the protest that was happening out on the street earlier out here at Hoover and Jefferson. That has completely cleared out of the intersection. You can see the intersection is now open and functional again. There's no more traffic control, so that's a good news for people just trying to drive around the USC area. I was looking to see if that group of protesters has moved around anywhere else. I don't see them blocking any other immediate streets at the moment. They may be around, or they may have just dispersed for the evening. So now it's going to be a matter of what is LAPD going to do with this other group of folks, where tempers have been pretty hot at times, if they're going to ask all of them to leave, or what the next step is going to be on this one. But for the most part, it looks like things, perhaps, you know, the worst as far as water bottles being thrown and all of that kind of stuff, it appears that that has subsided, and things have cooled down considerably here within the last hour, Juan.
It does look like the crowds have gotten a lot smaller, Chauncey, don't you think, based on what we're looking at?
Yes, and Des, if you had to kind of guess, I started counting a few minutes ago, and the shot moved, but I've counted more than at least 40 people that have been detained so far. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, 40, that sounds about right. I was thinking around, you know, between 3 dozen and 50. So you kind of split the middle, right around 40. That sounds like a pretty fair number of the folks that we had seen earlier. You know, when we got on the scene around 2:30 this afternoon, kind of, you know, after what happened in the morning with tents being taken away and some folks being detained, there were still several hundred people that were out here in Alumni Park, people with bullhorns, lots of signs, lots of chanting going on. There's a lot of food stations that were set up out here. And then, you know, once LAPD made their presence more known, we got to see a lot of people begin to disperse. But the most, you know, hardcore of the protesters, the ones who were willing to go to jail, there were, that sounds about right, maybe 40 or so. That's when they, you know, began to lock arms in the center, and every one of them that we saw went without any kind of resistance. One by one, LAPD detained them. Most of them have now left the campus. It looks like there's about another dozen of them that are waiting over at this process area right here, waiting for another van to come and take them away from the campus as well.
All right, Desmond, thank you. Once again, folks, we are live here on the campus of USC as we watch police get this protest under control. You see there, those folks right there sitting in the chairs. Those are the people that have been detained so far. And Juan, as this all started just after 5, and we've seen this sort of snowball with police arresting more and more and more people, but it started with just individual arrests with police trying to break up that crowd there in the middle of this park. I had a chance to speak with someone on social media who was telling me that he tried to go, he's a student, he tried to go on campus. He said right now they have the gates locked and he had to show the ID, and we saw that on camera earlier as police were checking ID as students were trying to get into campus.
Right, and you know, that makes sense because I remember covering many protests before that. They would have people kind of come in, agitators they would call them, that weren't necessarily related to this protest, and they would create a bigger problem by making sure these students are, you know, USC students, there for USC business. That is what makes it just safer for officers and protesters as well.
All right, we want to go back down to Luzdelia Caballero. She has been out there for the last few hours. Luzdelia, what is it looking like where you are now?
Well, right now things are very calm. I mean, as you can see, officers, you know, are talking amongst one another, and you know, they look relaxed. And honestly, we feel more relaxed now. I mean, I think during the few times where there was, you know, heightened tension, we were all kind of on edge, on the defensive, kind of wondering, hey, where do we go and what's going to happen next? I think everyone collectively now is thinking to themselves, okay, well, we've seen multiple people getting arrested, being walked away, and I'm talking about the people who were here in the middle of Alumni Park, some sitting, some standing, all of them had their arms linked. So once that happened, I think collectively, protesters are thinking to themselves, well, that happened. Do we want to get arrested? Do we want to stay here? Are they going to arrest everybody? I mean, that's a lot of people. So I would assume that based on the messaging that they've been putting out, their chants, and from what we've gathered in our conversations with multiple protesters and even students, community members who are present here, it seems like they are going to ride this out for as long as they can to the end. But of course, this is a much different situation than it was this morning when officers initially stormed the park to uproot the tents and take them away, and when that protester was arrested and put inside the patrol car, and of course when water bottles were being thrown and officers were being shoved and pushing back and arresting more people. Much different scene. Definitely a lot of trash left behind here at Alumni Park, as it seems like protesters, you know, had to get up and move their tents if they didn't want their tents confiscated before they, you know, eventually started walking around the park with their tents. So we do see a lot of trash, and I'm starting to notice that people are really, you know, walking away from the crowd, actually. And so that group of people that is gathered next to a neighboring building, I mean, the amount of people, you know, as people trickle out, it decreases, and so I think now it seems like officers, should they want to clear out this area, it is going to be a lot easier to do so. The chants aren't as loud, and you know, there aren't as many people, so I think ultimately we have a situation here where those who are here and chanting, you know, are holding true to their beliefs and are strong in their convictions, and they want to get that messaging out, and ultimately I believe they are going to likely end up staying here for the long haul, whether that's 10 more minutes, an hour, 2, but they're going to likely stay here for as long as they can, or they're allowed to before more arrests are made, or eventually everybody kind of goes their separate ways and calls it a day. But, you know, you can see it yourself. Officers are kind of walking around. I mean, they do have a line around the perimeter, but it certainly isn't as structured. That tells me that, you know, everybody overall is more relaxed. I mean, they are in their positions, but, you know, they're moving around and, you know, they're conversing, and students as well. You know, some leave and come back, and others don't come back, and that's kind of what we're seeing for the first time tonight, is that people are actually starting to leave. So you know, keep it here, and we'll continue observing, being your eyes and ears here on the ground to see ultimately, hey, what is going to happen next? Will there be more arrests? Is this protest going to continue for another hour or 2 or 3? Or are we really going to start seeing people starting to break up and go their separate ways and clear this area, which I think the initial effort, we're going on close to 2 hours or past that, but you know, officers said, hey, you got to clear out, you have 10 minutes. So we'll keep you posted on what happens next, because you know, we are curious to see whether there are going to be more arrests or if people are just going to, you know, go home.
Deli, I have a question for you before we let you go here. Was there a specific moment
Sure.
When you saw things kind of turn? I know you were covering this since about 10 a.m. this morning. Things were going rather peacefully. Was it the tents being removed? Was it the water bottle being thrown? When did things change, and how quickly did it escalate?
You know, the water bottles, clearly you have you know, a heavy object moving really fast, hitting officers on their back or their chest. In our case, it was our back. And yes, like, people are on alert and they don't know what's going on. And if you're an officer, you're trained to de-escalate and kind of assess the situation. And, you know, I could see it in that officer's face that got hit. He didn't know where it came from, who did it, and he was trying to assess what to do next. Is there a threat? So it was concerning being very, very close to him as he brought up his, you know, less than lethal weapon and pointed it in our area. But I would argue that that wasn't the point that was of the biggest concern. It was actually when officers initially stormed into Alumni Park and started grabbing those tents, because, you know, protesters and community members who were a part of this, and even students walking by, you know, they're walking by and they're going, hey, hold on, what is going on? We were given no warning. I mean, they believed they didn't hear anything, so you just kind of see people talking, and they're very calm, they're sharing stories, they're eating. I mean, you can see trash here. There's food, drinks, chips, you name it, pizza. And so they're just talking and conversing, and all of a sudden officers are coming and taking away their tents, taking away the area that they created where they felt safe in. So I think that's really when things got chaotic, and I felt were the most tense, I would argue. Again, because a lot of people here felt blindsided. They didn't hear the warning. I mean, how could you? The chants were so loud. We're talking hundreds of people before, obviously, somebody got arrested, and those hundreds easily went to over 1,000 people who then migrated to that patrol car. So, you know, in those moments, you know, we were getting pushed and shoved along with everybody else, because officers were trying to, you know, put some order in the area, and they really didn't know how, because they were definitely outnumbered. There were hundreds of protesters and very few, you know, DPS officers. So I think that was probably the time where I felt that there was the most tension. And now, I mean, it's a 360. It's very, very calm. And, you know, everybody out here is relaxed, and it seems like everybody's complying. Whether they'll get arrested or not, we'll have to wait and see.
And Luz Delia, we know it only takes a second or one thing for things to get chaotic. We saw the water bottles being thrown earlier, and that kind of started a commotion. And then when a person is arrested, then it starts another commotion with people yelling, "Let him or let her go." Well, we know we've seen this scene right here play out on campuses all across the U.S. We've seen campuses even having to shut down because of the clash between police and protesters. We want to go back up live to Sky Cal Desmond Shaw above the scene. And Desmond, is it still two separate protests going on, or does it seem like everything is focused back on campus now?
So I did find that other protest that had been occupying the intersection at Vermont and Hoover. My excellent pilot Mike helped me find them over on Vermont and 36th. And then that's also where LAPD has their kind of their command post set up. There's a ton of squad cars parked there. Some fire engines and paramedics if need be. So when they encountered that police line, they turned west along 36. Their numbers had dwindled to perhaps 24. There was about 50 or so people earlier, but it looks like it's been cut in half as it got mobile. Now we just witnessed the wagon that just pulled up right here. And so we're going to see possibly the last group of the protesters that were in the circle earlier are now going to be escorted off of the campus under arrest here at USC, and all of the spectators that have been here witnessing this, exchanging words with LAPD. I have to say, there was what looked like some, pretty, dare I say, almost like, congenial or jovial moments here between some of the protesters and LAPD. When I was looking earlier, it looked like they were laughing, they were talking. So, the folks that were in the center there that were willing to get arrested, everything involving them has been very compliant, very gentle. LAPD escorting them over there. Haven't seen anything, out of the ordinary or any kind of, use of force or any of that. It's been over in this area where tempers earlier were, pretty high. But even there, it just appears that there's a lot of folks kind of up against LAPD. We haven't seen anything else adverse coming from those folks right there. And then again, Vermont, or rather Jefferson and Hoover, that's completely reopened over on this side. The folks that had been protesting in this intersection, I think they circled the university completely. They went west on Jefferson, south on Figueroa, or east on Jefferson, I should say, and then doubled back on Exposition. Now they're headed towards the University Park, West Adams area. So things appear to be dying down here. The folks that are marching on the sidewalk, I don't think LAPD is probably going to have to do anything with those folks. It looks like that might just kind of naturally disperse itself with a little bit more time. But a lot of folks still out here standing around, I guess wondering what's going to happen next. It looks like LAPD, their main objective right now is making sure that people don't try to reoccupy this park. So it may just be a waiting game between LAPD and some of the surrounding protesters. But here you see some units now being released. So this is a sign that things are definitely beginning to simmer down a bit, Chauncey and Juan.
Yeah, that is a good sign. And, we're looking at two different shots here, Desmond, on your TV screen there. On the left, you see the ground shot where what we're looking at is more officers than actual protesters. So it does seem that things have definitely quieted down. You've been up there for a while as well, above USC. My guess and my question is, you've obviously noticed a crowd getting much smaller, right?
Yes, definitely. I think at some point, some folks, I mean, not everyone that we see down here was even actively involved in protesting earlier. A lot of people, it seemed like what might have just been, if they were walking to the library to study or walking to a class or whatever, and this kind of piqued their curiosity, and they stuck around just to kind of see how all of this transpires. And but now, as time progresses, we are starting to see people, begin to leave the scene, return to whatever business they have, get on with their evening now at this point. But there are still a sizable number of people that are just out here kind of watching LAPD, talking with some of the officers, a few people down here on the front lines kind of, getting in their face when they have the chance. I'm sure quite a few words are being exchanged. And LAPD just kind of standing there statuesque, making sure that no one is trying to get back into this park right now. And hopefully people will just kind of see this as things dying down and get on with their Wednesday evening.
Yeah, it looks like even the skirmish line, Desmond, in our ground shot, has started to break up just a little bit. So a lot has changed in a short amount of time. Thankfully, that's good news there. These were pro-Palestine protesters who were detained, and many of them arrested tonight after some tense moments at the university when LAPD officers tried to get them to move away from Alumni Park there, where they had assembled to protest all day today. And right around the 6 o'clock hour, apparently there were some bottles thrown at officers, water bottles. Our Luz Delia Caballero and our photographer out there also got hit by those same water bottles, and officers trying to remove the tents from their location there. That apparently got things pretty heated, and that's when the arrests started to happen. It was a large circle of protesters, one by one being picked off and arrested and taken away. And now what we're looking at right here is a very different situation. It looks like most of these protesters have been put into this van or maybe going to be released there from the university. And as this protest starts to wind down.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of restraint and patience from LAPD out there. This has gone on, all evening for the most part. Just after 5:30, we did hear LAPD issuing that dispersal order, asking protests to clear out Alumni Park there, here on the campus of USC. Shortly after, that's when we started seeing those arrests made. We want to go back on the ground to Luz Delia Caballero, and Luz Delia, producers are telling me that LAPD is now leaving the scene.
They're not leaving the scene as of now. So they're actually just moving closer to the protesters. So an officer came up to us and said, hey, you know what? You can move closer if you want. We are leaving the area. Although they're not leaving, the park. They're just moving closer. And I think at this time, that perimeter wall has been completely dissolved. I mean, they don't have officers lining every corner. They had a, rectangle or square, if you will, around the area where protesters were in a circle. And now, that line has collapsed, and officers are talking amongst themselves, and, they're not holding any sort of line. So again, it's indicative of things improving here in terms of tensions. And, while emotions may be, heightened here because protesters are very passionate about their cause and passionate about what they believe in, and committed to staying here for the long haul and making their voices heard. In terms of police presence, while they may not be leaving entirely, I mean, we did see some officers walk away maybe 20 minutes ago. It seems like they're going to hang out here, and that kind of, I think, the phrase hang out kind of seems to be the best way to describe how officers are handling the situation at this time. Before they were on the defensive, they really wanted to make sure that the protesters knew that they were here and they weren't messing around, and they were trying to handle this as delicately as possible. I mean, given the situations that, at times things were very tense. Honestly, they were very tense. And so now it seems like, they're talking amongst themselves, and earlier we were saying it seems like everything is more relaxed. Now things are even more so, I would say. Again, that perimeter line has completely dissolved, and, officers are in the area gathering, talking amongst themselves, and it almost seems like they're forming a line again. So, I mean, they're moving slowly, but, if you can see, it almost seems like they're forming another line. So I'm curious to see if they are going to move forward and try to get these protesters to move. I guess that would be my next question to them, because it kind of seems like they're talking and they're kind of, in a group, but it almost seems like there's a formation. We'll see if they start moving now, but it seems like they're getting a little more organized now, as, the night is upon us. It's getting darker, and lights are starting to go off. You see some protesters with their cell phones lighting up the crowd. So it will be very, very interesting to see what happens next, guys.
Yeah, I was about to say it's getting harder and harder for police as night falls. We want to go back up to Desmond Shaw. Desmond, any movement you've seen on this area where the protesters have been detained by police? I know you talked about one of the vans leaving earlier.
Well, it's actually right on cue now. Two more vans are leaving right now. So they will be going to the downtown station for fingerprinting and going through that whole process right now. So you can see the different layers of police tape that have been put up as they get ready to exit the campus right here. LAPD's helicopter right through the shot, so they are still overhead as well. This group of folks here, they just seem very content to stand here and kind of LAPD, and LAPD just kind of staring right back at them here with their line of officers. There's still several folks right here in these chairs, maybe one more van full of the protesters from the earlier circle that will be transported away from the campus when those vans come back. It is getting awfully dark down here, I gotta say. Looks like somebody has a light on down here. But all these folks just kind of standing around, and I don't know, it's just kind of strange, like, you know, what happens next? Well, now you've got some strobe lights out here. We'll see if people are using those to agitate the police, which we have seen in the past. In fact, that became such an issue that Los Angeles made a law against that, against using strobe lights at protests. If you recall what happened in Echo Park a couple of years ago, there was a lot of controversy about that. So it might just be somebody on a scooter, but just kind of piqued my interest there. You see a couple of flashing lights there through the trees. But getting pretty dark here in Alumni Park, not a lot of lights at this point. The law enforcement presence, you know, I mean, earlier we saw maybe 100 police officers surrounding the park. Now they have tape set up, hoping to keep people out. Just a small cadre of officers, maybe a dozen or so, that are just there to the left of the USC logo and that fountain that you see. Back to you now, Chauncey.
All right, Desmond, thank you for the very latest there. We've been on this scene here at USC, right on campus. Protesters, we've started to count earlier, but we know probably about more than 40 people have been arrested here on scene. We're going to switch things over, but we will continue to cover this coming up on KCAL News right now at 8 o'clock.
Now at 8, breaking news tonight as police move in and detain pro-Palestinian protesters at Alumni Park on the campus of USC, one by one, zip-tying their hands and leading them away.
That's right. We watched tonight around 5 o'clock as LAPD officers in riot gear right here moving in, ordering protesters to disperse, walking in formation, and then creating a line around the encampment that remained.
Well, before anyone was detained, things got tense. Water thrown at officers who then clashed with protesters. You could see it.
And dozens of those who followed the orders to disperse left the park. Then they took the protest to a nearby intersection right here, blocking off traffic for a time near campus right before taking off for another march.
Welcome to KCAL News at 8, streaming live on CBS News Los Angeles. I'm Susie Suh.
And good evening, I'm Chauncey Glover. We've got team coverage for you tonight. Our political reporter Tom Waite is there live on scene tonight with what's happening right now. Let's get to him at USC. Tom?
Hey, good evening to you, Chauncey. Well, right now, there are still protesters in Alumni Park, and it seems to be going strong. Lots of chanting, lots of drumming, and you can see there the crowd. It's a fairly large still. It started to thin a bit, but now it's kind of static, and they have not left. There was an order just a short time ago to leave the park. As you reported, the people in the center of the park were arrested, taken into custody, detained, and led away. But the crowd watching all of that, well, they have not left yet, as we've been saying, and they are still here. There's a lot of people kind of just milling about, some chanting, just a lot of drumming right now. Unclear whether or not the LAPD will enact any sort of skirmish line again and start to threaten arrests. The LAPD chopper once again making circles, going around here in the park trying to, an act of deterrence really to try to get everybody to leave. But right now, unless something changes, that is not happening. But earlier, as you said, it was pretty chaotic. There were some incidents that really had the crowd fired up. Take a look. And that's where we saw water bottles being thrown at officers. There was pushing and shoving. There was an order to disperse was given, and that's when all of this sort of really got tense. It was one of these moments where the crowd was sort of surging, and it was unclear what was going on. It was as the officers were forming lines and trying to form a circle. As you take a look at this video of them making those circles, as people were refusing to leave, police began then taking people into custody. And basically what happened was they kind of went into the center of the crowd, and they just were taking people away one by one. Very peaceful there, methodical, as they zip-tied people and led them from one spot there in the center of the crowd and out to an area where they were booked in a mobile booking area, and then taken from there. They will be processed downtown. So a very methodical but effective way that they were able to clear out the park at that point. Now the question is, what do they do with all the other people here? Let's take a look, though, at some of the events of the late afternoon. There was more than 100 officers that moved in columns, on foot, in armored cars. USC declaring the camps had to go, and all non-students had to leave. The LAPD was there to enforce all of that. And, for the most part, students were being peaceful with them. As we did show you, though, there were some incidents where water bottles and other objects were being thrown. Also, there was another group, as you take a look at this, a group that blocked the intersection just off of the campus. And obviously that created some major disruptions there. Police ordered them to leave. So just a lot of moving parts here as the USC administration trying to create some order here on campus, trying to break this up. But their efforts, at least in this area, have so far not been fully successful. You can still see all the crowd over in that area. Let's dip once bit more back in, Scotty. I think, you can kind of see where people are lined up. That's where the police line is, and officers have not dispersed. They're not leaving. They have not let people back into the center of Alumni Park. But essentially what you have is a group of dozens of protesters surrounding the center, but then, and we have onlookers who are kind of just hanging out on the stairs right on the side of the quad here that are just kind of looking on or kind of milling about. But the crowd much smaller than it was, and so far not nearly as tense. Chanting starting now, something I think they're saying free, free, free Palestine. But again, kind of trying to make their voices heard here as this continues on and shows no signs of ebbing, at least not from this part of the crowd that we are seeing right now. Let's go back to you.
Well, Tom, throughout your reports in the afternoon today, you were emphasizing the calm of LAPD officers. You have been out covering multiple protests, especially the ones after the death of George Floyd during the height of COVID. Tom, what was the differences that you noticed among officers today?
Well, that's a great question, Susie. Covering the George Floyd protests, those were so orderly, too, in the ones that I covered. People were so focused on that cause and so focused on spotlighting the injustice that happened, the murder of George Floyd. And really, it was an impressive show of they were making their feelings heard, but it was not destructive. It was very focused. This is, for the most part today, too, from what I've seen, a lot of it was as well. Like I said, the protesters in the center that we showed that video of, they did not resist. They did not. There was no violence besides what we saw, a few moments of people throwing some objects, which obviously is terrible. These officers, they don't know what's being thrown at them. They don't know what liquids those are. Who knows? Thankfully, it did not appear any of them were injured. We'll have to get a full report from the LAPD. But they're coming in here because they were asked to come in here. by the USC administration, who wants to clear out this area, who clearly they are probably trying not to let what happened at, say, Columbia University in New York play out here on the USC campus. They don't want to see an encampment here in the center of their campus. They don't want this protest to become an issue that drags on where it's disrupting campus life. I can tell you that speaking with some students who, some passing through, some in the crowd, were a little mystified and upset that the USC administration seemed to be shutting this down maybe too early, maybe that they should have let the students speak their minds a little bit longer, maybe keep the protests, allow them to let this play out a little bit longer and not quash it as quickly as they tried to do. But at the same time, you know, the officers, again, showing a lot of restraint here. They really were just forming lines, collapsing those lines, and in order to break up the crowd as much as they could, it was a very effective and orderly operation by the LAPD from the perspective where I was standing. It seemed that they were doing everything they could not to engage negatively with the crowd. They issued orders. They then gave them extra time to comply with those orders. They then moved in and made arrests. So in terms of the LAPD's performance here today, it did not seem that they were trying to antagonize anyone. The crowd also seeming to react very positively and in an orderly fashion, I should say. They didn't. Most of the people were not engaged in the LAPD in a way that was aggressive. There were some, again, we saw that on video. We saw some, people, shouting expletives and other issues. But really, in terms of organized protests, this was one where I think a lot of the people who are out here wanted to make their voices heard. They were effective in doing so. They were effective in showing that level of civil disobedience and getting arrested. But they did so in a way that was not violent. They did so in a way that was very peaceful. And, we see the crowd reacting right now. I'm not exactly sure what is going on, but you can see the police lines are still there. I'm trying to pop my head through here to see what's going on. But yeah, the police officers remain out here. They remain face to face. I think they're kind of moving slowly. They're pushing forward. We've seen this tactic done before. Very slowly, methodically, they push forward, which of course then has the crowd backing off. And then as they do this and continue to do this, it forces more people to kind of leave and disperse the area. One major issue too, probably assisting USC and the LAPD that is in this quad right now, is that they have shut down, I believe, we've been reporting they have shut many of the entrances and gates, if not all of them, to non-students, and are being very careful about who's being let in. Oftentimes we see in these situations with social media where people are posting a lot of information, and then that brings a lot of other people into the area, and that can grow these protests and make them much larger as the night goes on, because that can sometimes happen too. As people get off work or hear about these things or whatnot, then these protests can grow to a much larger size. We are not seeing that right now. We're seeing a very static crowd, one that I don't, from my perspective on the ground here, is not getting larger, but they're also sticking around. So the question is, what happens next? What do police do then?
And Tom, it seems like the crowd also changing here. Earlier, we saw that one group with their arms linked. We know a good number of those folks were arrested. And I'm looking at your shot, and it seems like a lot of people coming and going, just looking, trying to see what's going on here. What's the ratio, you think, now as to the protesters versus people who are just coming to see what's going on or coming to watch what is going on here?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chauncey. I've been trying to kind of figure that out, too. It's like, I think right now it's a more active and engaged crowd in the sense that they're chanting and, they're staying here, they're not moving. The crowd watching, I feel like, is smaller than it was. It's not quite as large. So there you have it.
All right, Tom, thanks for the very latest from your vantage point. We are continuing our live team coverage with our Desmond Shaw.
He's over the scene in Skycal over Exposition Park with a look now. Desmond.
Susie and Chauncey, we're looking at LAPD. It appears that they're breaking down the scene. This is where they were earlier processing everyone that had been arrested, putting them in zip ties, handcuffs, and they had a bunch of white chairs right there. They've just packed all that up. The wagons have left, and it looks like everyone that they have taken away from the campus in custody has now been taken. And you see a lot of officers now walking back to their station over on Vermont here. I'll just widen out and show you here. They're going to have a little bit of a brisk walk from the center of the campus over to Vermont Avenue. Vermont just north of Exposition, pretty close to 36th Street. That's where they've had a lot of basically their command center. This is, you see there's also some fire engines, some paramedics, ambulances down here if need be, in case anything, went south. Fortunately, that was not the case tonight. Despite some tempers flaring at times, with water bottles being thrown at LAPD as they were trying to surround the park. I have to echo what Tom was saying. LAPD really, not only did they handle this very delicately, they really were just kind of reactionary whenever they had to be. If someone shoved them, well, then they shoved back. If a water bottle was thrown in their direction, they made an about face. They had their shields ready. Obviously, they have their anti-riot gear as well. We didn't see anyone being struck or really anything outside of protocol, and we were all watching very, very closely as far as that is concerned. So it looks like they're breaking down that scene. It's hard to see here underneath Alumni Park where, it's not exactly very well lit, but there's still quite a few officers in these trees right in here, making sure that nobody tries to come back into the park and, start this all over again. And quite a few folks, kind of a mixture of protesters and passers-by that have kind of interrupted whatever they were doing to come and check all of this out. So we'll just have to see how that plays out throughout the night. I guess, you could still call that a protest to a degree. The protest that for a time, several hours, was blocking Jefferson and Hoover on the north end of the campus, disrupting afternoon rush hour traffic. They went mobile, marched around USC, stuck to the sidewalks, and I believe they may have dispersed at some point well west of the university. We saw them walk towards the the future George Lucas Museum over in that area on the edge of Exposition Park. So you can see here, and everyone who had gathered around LAPD in this area, they have dispersed as well. So I'm kind of curious if, if LAPD were to just leave, if everyone else would leave as well, or, if they were try to come back to the park, or what exactly would happen if they were to leave. But it looks like, we are perhaps in the breaking down process right now, Chauncey and Susie.
All right, thanks a lot, Des. Hopefully things will remain peaceful out there tonight on the campus of USC. Now, you can stick with KCAL News and KCALnews.com. Of course, we are monitoring the very latest developments on this, and we'll bring them to you as they come in. Well, coming up next, an honor returned to a former USC star.
That's right. Sports Central's Darren Haynes joins us after the break to explain.
Plus, thieves targeting tracks in the Inland Empire. Tonight, we have details on the railroad robbery.
I'm Rita Bay Shabazi. Tomorrow on KCAL News Morning, celebrating friendship and beyond. We'll be